God-sized story.
Hello and welcome to another episode of God-Sized Stories. Today, the guest is me. I decided it was time I should share another story from my life that the Lord has blessed me with. My story today revolves around evangelism. Evangelism is such a beautiful thing that the Lord gives us and is so unique and different to each and every one of us. It can be done in so many ways. Obviously, it can happen through just living your life. Being Christ to the world is such a beautiful thing. But also, we have such an opportunity to just say words to people. The Lord has given us scripture to learn. He gives us chances to share those scriptures with people, and it's just something that brings me so much joy to do. When I was in college, it was by far one of my most favorite things to do, was just go out on campus, meet people, maybe go to the dining halls, and just ask, hey, can we have a conversation? Can we maybe talk to you a little bit about Christ? Things like that. But I had equally as many opportunities just to be me in school and just love on people, to share my stories with people. Exactly why I do this podcast is because I know that these stories are going to affect people. God's going to reach people through the stories of our lives. But also at the same time, we need to be prepared because we have countless opportunities and they're going to come at us all the time. 1 Peter 3:15 says, "But in your hearts honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you. Yet do it with gentleness and respect." And today I want to share a story when that happened in my life when I was in college, and it was so exciting, and it's still to this day probably my favorite story to tell about evangelism. I went to Northern Illinois University to learn elementary education. So to teach, kindergarten through 8th grade, somewhere in there. And one of the classes that I took was titled Theory of Education. Now, as a lot of people might guess out there, it had very little to do about teaching and a lot to do about philosophy and theories of things. Even most of the things we read had nothing to do about education. Things like factory farming, how Disney is bad and warping our kids' minds, stuff like that. But one thing that I respect about the teacher, still to this day, you could disagree with him 100%. And I think a lot of times he would purposely say things that we would disagree with to get us upset. But if in the papers you wrote for his class, or the things you would stand up and say in class, if you had some sort of evidence to back up what you were saying, he would respect you. He would give you full credit on homework. And that's one of the things that happened one day in this class. We read The Trial and Death of Socrates for class by Plato. And the way that this class would usually work, it was once a week. We'd have to read something before class. We'd show up to class, and we'd talk about this. Whatever thing we read or watched, we'd talk about it for a half hour. And then we'd have to go home, not a half hour, talk about it the first 3 hours of class pretty much. And then we would have to write a probably 5-page paper for next week to hand in based on what we read and our discussion. So we read this book about, the death of Socrates, and we walk in, we're sitting in our seats, and I look up at the board, and I'm immediately, I'll say, troubled as I read what he's written on the board. He would always have an opening statement for us to discuss, and it said, "The death of Jesus to Christianity is equal to the death of Socrates to philosophy." And, automatically I'm triggered, let's say, as I'm looking at this, like, what is this guy talking about? He knows nothing. And so the first hour, he's, giving his thesis on why he thinks that's true, and about how, from his perspective, it pushed, the death of Jesus shot off the Christian church. From a numbers standpoint, that's a true statement. That's what he was looking at, was like, it grew when he died. The same thing happened with philosophy when Socrates died. Everyone got all excited about it. They're like, well, this guy was unrightfully killed for what he believed. But in his thesis, that's where it all ended. And I'm sitting there this whole time, and I'm looking disgruntled, and I'm, shoveling around in my chair. And he can tell, and he knows I'm a Christian, and he knows where I stand. And after his thesis, he turns to me, and he's like, Craig, it looks like you disagree with me. And I said, yeah, I do, to an extent. And he's like, would you care to explain? And I was like, well, yeah, it'll take me a few minutes, but yeah. And so then what he does, he would do this on occasion where he would give somebody then the marker to write on the board and say, well, the class is yours. And so then this was my opportunity. This is what I'd been preparing for all this time. He's giving me the chance to stand in front of a class of my peers and share why Christ dying isn't just a thing that started a revolution. It's something that means everything to us as Christians. Nothing matters without that. Without Jesus dying and resurrecting, which is another thing he didn't talk about, the importance of the resurrection. It wasn't just Jesus' death. Jesus just being a martyr would have been nothing, but the fact that he was martyred and resurrected is really what it's about. And so I go up there and I kind of say that, and he's like, interesting. Compound more, if you would. And I was like, okay, I've prepared for this once again. In college, I used a handful of different things for evangelism, but one tool that I loved so much and is wonderfully simple, and I'm going to link some things to it in this episode that I still love, called 2 Ways to Live. And it's this beautiful, simple thing where you can just draw these pictures. So people like me that have no artistic skill can draw these pictures because it's mostly circles and stick figures. But so I, had the floor. So 15, 20 minutes I stood there and I gave this beautiful, God-inspired, 100% him, not me, gospel presentation on the board. Just pouring my heart out, because these are people that I'd been in classes with for 2-3 years at this point, and so I know them very well. And I finish all this stuff, and usually once somebody does that in this class, he has a rebuttal to your rebuttal. But his response was only, I think right now is a good time to take our 15-minute break. So we went and, as college students, we obviously go get coffee because we need it. And I'm going and I'm down at the coffee machine with all my friends, and they're like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. And some of them had grown up their whole life in the church. They're like, how did you have the strength to do that? And then it was honestly, I had to tell them, it's a mix of two things. First of all, as I said before, it's not me. It's 100% God. His words flowing through me. And then on top of that, being prepared. As I was reading from 1 Peter earlier, it is so important to have those things ready to just proclaim him, because you're going to get those opportunities. And where they are today, some of those people, I don't know. But if all it was me sharing it with them, and for the ones that were Christians in the room, maybe it empowered them to be like, I should be prepared to share my faith. Or maybe they weren't Christians and they heard me speak and it pushed them along a little bit more. Because just like so many things in life, the first time we hear something, we're not going to believe it. Or the first time we hear it, it's not going to stick. We have to hear it so many times. Or maybe that wasn't their time, but maybe they remember me. Or maybe not even me. They remember, man, once I was in college, and there was this guy that claimed to be a Christian, and he was really chill about it, and he wasn't rude about it. He cared about us. I could tell. Maybe that's all it was for them, and it just moved them one step closer to hopefully God saving them one day. We don't know, but I know in my heart, I did what the Lord wanted me to in that moment. I was able to share his love of his death and resurrection with them. And the joy that I had in that moment was better than anything else. Anything else I could have had in this world was just the opportunity to share his love with others. So I want to end this time by encouraging you to do the same. If you're a believer, you have this power. You might be scared. It can be scary, but the worst thing that can happen, at least here in America, is that they're going to say, no, I don't want to hear this. And if they say no, it's okay. Because it's about your heart and your obedience to the Lord. And that's just what's so encouraging. I've been told no. Oh my gosh, I couldn't tell you how many times I've been told no to share the gospel with people. And I was still encouraged because I love the Lord and he loves me, and that's what he wants me to do, is attempt to share his love. But I can almost guarantee that if you go with a prayerful heart, pray often for chances, he will provide those chances. Scripture will even show this. Colossians 4:2-4, continue steadfastly in prayer, being watchful in it, with thanksgiving. At the same time, pray also for us, that God may open to us a door for the word, to declare the mystery of Christ, on account of which I am in prison, that I may make it clear, which is how I ought to speak. Paul wrote that in prison, because the thing he wanted more than anything else were opportunities to share Christ with the other prisoners, and even more so the guards. That's what he wanted. He praised the Lord that he was in prison because it gave him opportunities to share Christ with the prison guards. And I want to have that same heart for people that Paul had for people. So, listeners, I really encourage you to do this. If you're afraid, as I said, I get it. If you prepare yourself, you'll feel so much more excited and ready for it. But don't let that be a roadblock for you. If you don't feel 100% prepared, it's okay. Go with another believer that is prepared. Pray about it more. The Lord wants to give you the joy through that. And listeners, as always, thank you so much for listening. I couldn't do this without you. Goodbye.